The system is now at breaking point for graduates. I believe the student loans have become a debt trap. It is time for all of us to do something about it. Will he cut interest rates on student loans?
They are under new leadership, Mr. Speaker. They're up there. The only change she's brought to her party is to make it smaller. And she talks about interest rates on loans. Mr. Speaker, not only have energy prices come down this morning, but...
Good afternoon, Britain. The Whitehall varnish didn't just crack today, it was pulverised. In what will be remembered as the most savage PMQs of the year, Kemi Badenoch didn't just ask questions, she performed a live institutional autopsy on Sir Keir Starmer's government. From the graduate debt trap to the Washington ambassador scandal, the air in the House of Commons turned toxic as the leader of the opposition threw the ultimate nuclear nail across the dispatch box. Whilst Prime Minister tried to hide behind 14 years of history, Badenoch pointed to the reality of 2026, a nation where youth unemployment is higher than the EU and where the party in power faces accusations that have left the backbenches in a state of visible shock. Is Starmer governing, or is he simply monitoring the collapse of his own authority? The first painful truth of the day hit the millions of graduates currently drowning in interest. Badenoch exposed the sovereign inversion. While Starmer promised to abolish fees to win his leadership, he is now freezing repayment thresholds and saddling the next generation with a debt trap that lasts a lifetime. The Bank of England has confirmed that his policies are fueling youth unemployment, yet the Treasury's only answer is to take money from the pockets of graduates to fund Benefit Street. The most hideous contrast. Starmer secured legislation to fix his own pension while refusing to lift a finger for the students who believed his promises. It is a categorical betrayal of the very working people he claims to serve. But the temperature in the chamber reached a boiling point over the issue of institutional rot. While Starmer flexes about energy bills coming down by a measly £17, Badenoch pivoted to the Prince of Darkness and the Washington ambassador crisis. The sight of a high-level diplomatic appointee being linked to the Epstein files has triggered a rebellion within the Labour ranks. When the phrase pedo defender party was hurled across the room in reference to an arrested MP, the Speaker struggled to maintain order. The public sees the pattern, a government that polices speech but ignores the sleaze on steroids festering in its own inner circle. The final nail in the autopsy was the issue of competence. Badenoch branded Starmer as a zombie leader, a man who has made 15 U-turns and has zero imagination among his 411 MPs. While retail sales wobble and business confidence hangs by a thread, the Prime Minister continues to caw from the sidelines about the previous government. The public is no longer listening to the excuses. They are looking at the fact that unemployment has increased every single month under this administration. The prosecutor in number 10 is now the absentee landlord of a fractured nation. Keir Starmer may have survived the session, but he did not survive the argument. The strange death of integrity in Westminster is being written in real time. The curiosity of the viewer shouldn't be about whether he will make a 16th U-turn. It should be about how much longer the country can endure a leadership that cannot govern because it is too busy managing its own scandals. Kemi Badenoch has fired a sharp shot into the heart of the establishment varnish. The question is, who will be left to pick up the pieces when the final collapse happens? The silence from the Treasury is a confession. The game is up.
The room fell silent the moment the question was asked. No headlines, no slogans, no political choreography, just a blunt demand echoing across the committee floor. When will the migrant hotels finally close? Within seconds, the tension tightened, and for the first time in months, the Prime Minister found himself cornered. What followed was not just another parliamentary exchange, but a collision between a government under pressure and a system buckling under its own weight. This was the clearest glimpse yet into the immigration firestorm, now engulfing Britain, a crisis of overcrowded hotels, anxious communities and policies struggling to keep pace with reality. And one unsettling question is now gripping Westminster. Has Keir Starmer lost control of Britain's borders?
We do want, asylum hotels were at their height measured, I think it was 400 or so. They're down to about 200 now. I'm absolutely determined that we will close them by the end of this Parliament, sooner if it's possible, and that's why military sites are under consideration.
Can you understand how local residents feel and the uncertainty there is? They've been told that they've been identified as a site. They don't know when it's going to open. They don't know what the clientele are going to be, and there is real concern. And the MPs that represent those areas have made representations to me as chair of the Select Committee. We really need to understand how this is going to affect local areas. Can you sympathise with that?
I do understand that.
It began with what sounded like an ordinary inquiry into accommodation planning, but it escalated with remarkable speed. MPs pressed the Prime Minister to explain why hundreds of asylum seekers remained in hotels despite repeated promises to shut them, and why military sites in Catterick, Crowborough and Inverness were being prepared quietly in the background. The committee chair pushed harder, warning that local residents had been briefed without receiving any timelines, impact assessments or even basic information. Many felt blindsided and abandoned. Starmer attempted to calm the room, repeating his pledge that the government wants to close them by the end of this Parliament. Yet as he spoke, it became painfully clear that this was no longer a question of policy, but of credibility. Communities are living with uncertainty, MPs said, and the government could not keep hiding behind vague assurances. When Starmer insisted that he had inherited record levels of claims and that the system was finally being repaired, the room did not soften. Instead, the exchange exposed a reality the government has tried hard to downplay, the sense that Britain's asylum system has drifted dangerously close to breaking point, while ministers scramble to regain control. Outside the walls of Parliament, the numbers paint an even sharper picture. More than 41,000 people arrived by small boat last year, one of the highest totals ever recorded, and a 13% increase from the year before. The promise to stop the boats now rings hollow to many voters who feel the crisis is worsening rather than stabilising. Hotels, which were supposed to be an emergency measure, remain packed. Attempts to phase them out have been overwhelmed by the continuing rise in arrivals and the slow processing of claims. And now the public is being told that military bases may need to be converted into holding centres, a move that has sparked controversy from Kent to Scotland. There is also the issue of new border enforcement powers, such as the authority to seize and inspect migrants' mobile phones. This measure, designed to dismantle smuggling networks and verify identities, has triggered a fierce backlash from human rights groups, who warn that Britain is sliding into a climate of surveillance anxiety. For a government elected on the promise of competence and control, these developments cut deep. They reinforce the perception of a state constantly reacting, never anticipating, and struggling to translate its pledges into results. Across the UK, the emotional temperature is rising. Residents in coastal towns and inland communities alike say they feel left in the dark, unsure when or how new arrivals will be placed in their area. Many emphasise that their frustration is not directed at the migrants themselves, but at what they describe as an atmosphere of disorder. They want clarity, transparency, and planning, not sudden announcements delivered after decisions have already been made. This sense of neglect has reignited tensions that erupted during the anti-immigration protests of 2025. Some demonstrations were peaceful, others turned hostile, forcing police to brace for new flashpoints. Councillors report that public meetings have become increasingly heated, with tempers fraying and fears spreading quickly online. At the political level, the pressure is intensifying. Reform UK is capitalising on public anger, presenting Labour as weak on borders. The Conservatives accuse Starmer of hiding behind bureaucratic defences. Even Labour supporters privately acknowledge that the government is wobbling on one of the issues voters care most deeply about. All of these undercurrents were on display during the committee confrontation. The MP's scepticism, the Prime Minister's strained responses, and the atmosphere of restrained frustration reflected a country on edge, a nation that feels its asylum system has drifted beyond its control. Starmer's defence rests on a single line that the last government left behind a broken system and Labour is now fixing it. He argues that claim processing is improving and that the hotel numbers will drop as reforms take hold. Yet outside the committee room, the public is growing impatient. People want to see arrivals fall, hotels close, and a sense of order restored. Instead, they see a system still pushed to capacity. Military bases quietly prepared in the background and legal battles gathering pace over Britain's obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights. Trust is eroding, and each fresh surge of arrivals deepens the impression that the government is responding to events rather than shaping them. In this context, the committee clash felt like a moment of reckoning. It forced Starmer to defend not just his policies but his authority. It also raised a deeper concern that no minister could brush aside whether Britain's borders are being governed by strategy or by crisis management. As the hearing drew to a close, Starmer attempted to reclaim the narrative by insisting that the priority must be reducing claim numbers so that hotels and temporary sites become unnecessary. But the looks exchanged among MPs suggested little confidence that the government could deliver on that promise. When the Prime Minister left the room, questions lingered in the air, not only inside Westminster, but across the country. If Labour cannot bring this system under control, what comes next? And how long before the tension spilling out in committee rooms begins to spill onto Britain's streets? Britain is standing at a knife edge. The migrant hotel scandal, far from fading, is becoming a symbol of a deeper, more structural crisis. And the most unsettling question remains unanswered. How close is Britain to a full-scale border breakdown? And what happens if the system finally gives way?
Thanks to the power of our example, now nearly 60 countries in the world have similar legislation. In 2019, under Baroness May, the UK became the first major economy to legislate for net zero by 2050, supported by the Labour Party and parties across this House.
Since the early 2000s, Britain has been the subject of a massive demographic experiment, one you never voted for, and one your leaders never asked permission to conduct. In just 20 years, net migration has added nearly 10 million people to our shores. To put that in perspective, that is the equivalent of building 9 cities the size of Birmingham. But here is the painful truth. We didn't build the 9 Birminghams. We didn't build the hospitals to match. We didn't build the schools. And we certainly didn't build the houses. Instead, the establishment crammed millions into existing communities, sending rents to record highs and undercutting the wages of the British working class. Today, we are looking at the true cost of mass migration, the data that proves why you are materially poorer, why the NHS is at a breaking point, and why the British public is officially sick to death of being told to cut back on coffee while the borders remain a revolving door. The government loves to brag about headline GDP growth. They tell us the economy is growing, but they conveniently forget to mention that it's only growing because the population is being inflated. When you look at the data that actually matters, GDP per capita, the reality is pathetic. Since 2008, our real growth per person has been a flat 0.7%. In real terms, the average Briton is now £16,500 worse off than they would have been under old trends. Your £100,000 today only buys what £60,000 did before the crash. We are chasing growth by inflating the numbers, but the individuals in those numbers are drowning. Rents have surged by an extra £130 a month across England, specifically due to this pressure. That is money taken directly from the pockets of young families to fuel a globalist agenda that views citizens as nothing more than units on a spreadsheet. It isn't just your bank account, it's your community. In London, nearly 50% of social housing is now occupied by international arrivals. In Paddington, that number hits a staggering 72%. People who were born and raised here, who have paid into the system for generations, find themselves at the back of the queue. This isn't about prejudice, it's about observation.
When you flood a population with people from divergent social norms, the social cohesion that holds a country together begins to fray. We are training doctors and nurses at great expense, only to watch them flee to Australia because they can't afford a home here. Meanwhile, we import cheap labour to fill the gaps, which only keeps wages suppressed. We are trading our cultural identity for short-term sticking plasters on a compound fracture.
The call for net zero migration isn't an extreme position. It is a plea for breathing room. It is a demand to allow our infrastructure to catch up, our wages to rise, and our services to recover. The British public is tired of being told to integrate into communities that no longer feel like home. To the viewers who stayed, you see the cities being built in the shadows of the ones we already have. My promise to you is to keep tracking the data that Whitehall tries to bury in the fine print. We confirm that the current direction is unsustainable, and we sharply chart the truth. You cannot have a nation without a border, and you cannot have a society without a shared culture.